Good morning. Happy Friday. Welcome to Let's Build Daily. I'm your host, Chris Carolan. Super exciting topic for me today. Hopefully, talking through it will help some of you out there as well. But probably going to sound, fairly self-indulgent at times as I work through this today. Um, Very excited about seeing this object in some portals already, and what could be to kind of solve a number of gaps in the system. The system I'm talking about as I work on good ways to promote our customer platform hub uh, is the HubSpot customer platform. And we're going to be talking about this, starting a conversation, me and George B. Thomas next week, setting the foundation for what we're going to be talking about in this hug so that we can help everybody understand what it means to be a customer platform and how we can help HubSpot users realize the value of the HubSpot customer platform. It takes understanding what it can do for you first. So going beyond point solutions into a customer platform mindset. Speaking of customers, the deliverable objects, I think, is going to be a key. And I'm going to do my darndest to make it a native object at some point. Maybe it won't be called deliverables. But as soon as you start calling it something else, you open the door for a lot of iteration and needs of different businesses and what's going to make sense. But I'm a firm believer that almost anything in a value exchange could be called the deliverable. So if we're looking for ways for this to apply to any user of HubSpot, I think that's a word not dissimilar from order, deal, contact, company, the rest of the native objects. So where did this come from? Quite simply, most recently, it came from the concept of how do we create an Amazon-like experience for B2B order management. Saw too many people just getting buried under calls, meetings, emails, looking for order updates. That's it. And whenever we get to the point of it's information we have somewhere, the process of maintaining it and sharing it, communicating it is 100% under our control. That's when I start to look for ways for HubSpot to help systems and processes to help make the situation better, both for customers and the customer facing teams having to serve those modern expectations created by things like Amazon. One problem I was running into is the way that these B2B systems like ERPs, like HubSpot, handle line items. And what I was seeing was stuff like this. And I first should note that this is actually from the current order object, right, which we built out yesterday. Thanks to the team for pushing this new record view live. I was pleasantly surprised by it yesterday. I love what's going on with the right sidebar over here. Just for your awareness, you still can't create an order record, to my knowledge, without an integration like Shopify or NetSuite activating it, or without some custom coded actions to access the API, which is read and write available for orders and carts. There's even an orders pipeline API available that you might want to check out. Um, Without that mechanism, that's the only way to create these right now. There's no create button. Um, so it's a little hard to access, and that's probably why you're not going to run into it unless you've done the work to set something like that up. Uh, but if you want that code, just simply like create, start playing with orders based on a deal closed one. Let me know in the comments or DM me, and I'm happy to share it with you. It's pretty simple, and it's really just a mechanism to start playing with this orders record. So, as much as I like this, on the right, it's very, and you can see carts on the bottom, right? Um, it's very e-commerce like, and you can see right away, this is your total, one place for shipment details, right? So right away we're seeing, like, if our goal is to differentiate like this and to show different statuses for different line items, right? That's where, hey, we can see all the line items we purchased here. This is an example of certified reference materials. We can see total. But as soon as, so we can see differentiation here, but as soon as we start to summarize, right? And we'll just say here, so this shipment tracking number, right? Status, right? As soon as I need 3-4 different shipments, like, this is not good enough, right? And we try to accommodate it by throwing, address properties and, special totaling properties on individual line items. And it's just not tenable. It does not work. It did not work in the ERP. It wasn't working for me in HubSpot. So that's what led to the deliverable object. And as soon as I went that route, everything, literally every concept or strategy I was trying to employ to serve a customer portal in this way to help the customer facing team out became possible. And it's largely because of a couple things that I've seen talked about many times in terms of wish lists for line items. And I'll say really quickly, I think line items need to be what they currently are. There's no other object in the system meant to be this place for, like, almost spontaneous creation and customization. Maybe it's in the product library, maybe it's not. I need the ability to do both on a deal, on a quote, in an invoice. Now on an order, probably eventually, now that we see line items showing up there. But I need to iterate. I might need to create 3 different versions of that record, if we're calling them a record, and knowing you're only going to pick one, right? So, like, and then after you pick one and after you close and after you buy, we don't want it to change. It can't be that malleable after that. That's going to screw up our reporting and create miscommunication and create broken promises because we started messing with the thing that we promised up front, right? And this is another thing I saw, like, the need to, like, kind of deprocess and reprocess as you move across different systems so that we're showing the customer the right invoice that matches the PO, but then we need our system to be able to understand the bill of materials required. All these things, it's like we're trying to funnel this through a line items mechanism that is just incapable of handling it. So we end up with all these different notes, if you can imagine, and it's not unlike trying to, so if we have, so usually the first attempt is, okay, I'm going to put a shipping address. I'm going to put shipping address properties on the product. So right there, right away, we are adding properties that make no sense to things that are stored in the product library. right? Just so we can have them available to us on the line item records so that we can maybe create some different shipping addresses related to this. And the farther you get into a customized version of the line item like that, the worse reporting gets, like guaranteed. Like, how hard will it be and how hard is it to report on those addresses? How many different addresses did we ship to for the same customer? You know, how much work are we actually putting in? How many times did they have to change the address? That's a killer, right? Like, if you put, if you have to put 3 different addresses throughout these line items, and then they call up to change it, to change one of them because it's taking you too long to get it to them. There's one on back order. Like, all of that just starts to get impossible to maintain, but you need to find a way to track it to make your systems better, right? To make the process easier. And when we think about things like Amazon and that order portal, it's easy to say, oh, yeah, they're like the biggest company in the world. They have the systems in place and they can afford to do that and blah, blah, blah. HubSpot can do this for you. And the hardest part is you making the decision that you actually want to do it. Because what I'm showing today is guaranteed to be the most affordable way, probably the most user-friendly way, probably the most self-maintained way that doesn't require some huge managed services agreement for you to support it by a third party, right? All these things I'm thinking about because these are the reasons we haven't been able to do things like this in the past. The cost was ridiculous. The effort was ridiculous to get all these systems talking to each other and all these integrations and portals, and that wasn't tenable either. So we couldn't do this stuff. We had glorified spreadsheets, or we had, $1 million implementations. Now you have HubSpot, and the cost does not change significantly. We're just using the same tools in a more creative way, right? So this is all stemming from, so I'll start it here. Like, when we first started our agency, this was one of the offerings, we wanted to focus on, because we thought there's an opportunity to help people, whether they were ready or not. We weren't sure. Some people are more ready than others, right? Especially anything that involves ERP interaction. That audience is generally less ready than any other audience. But when I started thinking about this, it's like, okay, we want to create this experience. What's going on with the data, right? So that's when, this map became a thing, right? Always thinking about this customer journey and how are we mapping our data and our processes to support this journey in the most appropriate, friction-free, or adding some friction at times way, right? So so I started thinking about what I would want in a portal, what I've seen in other portals, right? And that's where I'll just jump to the spreadsheet real quick, but that's what this black bar is here, right? And if we think about the user story involved, right? If it's a support area, right? And I have my resources. So this is digital content, that has been curated just for me based on favorite tagging, wish list, and the products I have purchased, right? We've got some support team contacts. We've got some training courses on certificates, based on tagging products I've purchased, things I've trained on, things I've trained my team on. We've got service tickets. And as I talk about this, like, this is the differentiation. Like the customer portal in HubSpot right now only services this right here. Right. So this is a very different world than the customer portal that we're used to. And we're talking about CMS plus CRM, not Service Hub customer portal. That is this line here is all that's served by that portal. So we're going much farther beyond that. Customers want more. People are asking all the time, can we develop more things on that tool? And the answer is sometimes, but it's always a lot harder and harder to maintain than going the CMS, client portal route. Right. So we want to see our products too, maybe a wish list, products and services I found on the website and added. Maybe I'm purchasing later. We've got quotes, we've got orders, deliverables. So what's the status of this stuff? Anything that's in transit, right? My installs in the field. Budget related stuff, contract, subscription payments, my info. Like, can I keep my info up to date? For the team that I'm asking to bend over backwards so that they can serve me better. Right. Now, all these things highlighted in green, I believe, can be served by this one object. Obviously, this is always dependent on the use case that you might have. But I would challenge you a little early today to find the opportunity. Try to work from this one object first and see how far can you get. I think the main thing that changes how you look at it is if you have to integrate with other systems, right? And we try to mirror when we can. I'm not necessarily a huge advocate of digital twinning HubSpot against these other systems that aren't designed, to serve customers and communication the way HubSpot is. But that's a different conversation. But think about how you can use this object to support, the entire customer lifecycle here, right? And how that relates to renewals and upgrades and cross sells and resells. Like, this is the kind of object that's needed to support all of those initiatives much better, right? So if this is a place that we want people to go and get self-service information, right? What's the data? Like, how is the data going to get there, right? Where is it coming from is kind of the next step in my thought process, right? And that's where the objects come in, right? And we went through it yesterday with, the form gets filled out, contact gets created, company, and aligning this journey of objects and this creation of objects and the life, because the objects have a life cycle too, right? And if you can think about that, their life cycle needs to match up with the customer life cycle, while fitting your internal processes in there too, right? And you can create alignment throughout. That is it just makes so much easier, because without this, right, the team is manually having to align everything, right? They can't see the customer data because it's buried in the ERP, and they get the email and they got to dig in the ERP to understand the status, right? And then they bring it out from the ERP and send it to the customer. That is them manually aligning the data so that they can get it where it needs to go. The more you can use your process to do that and your systems to do that, the less work. Now, if I don't have to spend time going into my ERP, I can be more personable. I have time to think about, ask them why they need that information. Would they like to get that information a different way besides emailing you? Is there a reason they didn't see it on the website? Or Was there something that happened during the sales process that, led them to asking this new question because they're confused on the lead times, right? Digging in and really being able to focus on true customer success and true customer experience, not just is the system working for you? Yes, no. Uh, right. This opens up the space for that, right? We're not trying to replace people. We are trying to create the space for more human interaction and, the relationship management required to create successful customers and raving customers, right? So knowing where that data is going to come from is crucial. You can see these pink lines are, leading to HubSpot objects, including order and deliverable, right? That's at the point that they become a paying customer. And then we have invoices, payments, subscriptions. So again, like yesterday, if you're a customer facing team, including accounting, and you're trying to understand why they haven't paid you or why they paid you too much or why they didn't pay you enough, and you had access to all this information in one record, that process of collections or reconciliation gets so much easier. And by the way, you look better as a company when you don't have to ask the customer why your shit isn't together, why you don't have your information right. So once we have this, right, now it's about, differentiation. And now I'll dig into this deliverable object, right? Because this is for most use cases where we have one order and multiple line items, right? Multiple line items that need to be managed. I'd say if your situation is always a one-to-one of orders and deliverables, like orders will only ever have one line item on them, then you can do this on the order object most likely without needing a deliverable object. But the second you need a second deliverable, that process doesn't work. The second you need a back order, say I ordered 100 things, they're all the same line item, but I need to ship out 80 right now and 20 later, right? That gets harder and harder to do and manage, without being able to differentiate using something like a deliverable. So how are we differentiating? And a little bit of the payoff on, why pipelines are so powerful and why I think we can do this via pipelines. I shared that long list, in the post about pipelines really make this possible, custom object pipelines. And what's interesting, like if you can just take a step back and all the power that pipelines provide, all the activation that staging properly and creating conditional stage properties. Now we don't have the same kind of development over on custom objects that we do on deals and tickets. But if we ask for it, we might be able to get there, right? But either way, creating pipelines powers automation, powers lists, who's in which stage when, how long is it taking, all of these things become possible, right? And I'm not telling you to move your whole project management system into here. This is not replacing ERPs, right? I show this and there's a reason not everything in the portal has data that's going to be coming directly from, it's not going to be created by HubSpot, I'll say, right? But as soon as we say we want to show the customer, if we can make a space for it in HubSpot, which is all we're doing here, right? The pipeline management handled in this way right? We're just creating a space for the data to live in HubSpot in a way that's easily understood by our customer facing teams and can be mirrored on the CMS portal, right? So this staging, right? Let's see what I have over here, right? I've got a few, physical products, high consideration physical products, if you will. And I've got a warranty. So this is documentation, and these are hard goods that are going to be shipped out, right? Things like warranties, yeah, like you'll see in these systems, and this is where the ecosystem, the HubSpot ecosystem has a lot to learn when it comes to integrating with accounting systems and ERPs and other post-sales management systems. Things like warranties, I've seen such a hard time people having to manage that appropriately because it's a $0 item that becomes very important to the process, but we don't have any place to put the information. And those are the kinds of things that we're confirming with customers. When does your warranty end? When did you get started? You should not be asking the customer those things. You have that information. You have it somewhere, but you can't find it because you don't have a place for it. It's in an email somewhere. It's in a filing cabinet somewhere, right? So we're creating the space for this information in an organized way, and that's what's powering all this. So we can have analytics and reporting, right? Set up those stages. So if somebody asks for a dashboard, let's say, and that's one thing I thought this was going to be a manufacturing, specific pain that we were solving, an industrial pain that we're solving. But as soon as I became a partner and saw how everybody's doing this, I thought back to the partners I had worked with, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm usually understanding, if I'm lucky, they're inviting me into the project management tool to understand status. But most times there's a spreadsheet that we're sharing or a slide deck that's being shared to understand status. It's not self-service. When it is self-service, good luck having it updated because it's this extra thing that has to be updated that's not connected, to the CRM objects in the place where the internal processes are happening, right? So I learned quickly that this was a B2B problem, like all over the place. And things like a B2B Domino's pizza tracker, right, was resonating with a lot of people. So as an example, let's say somebody asks for a dashboard or some new report that actually requires a lot of data cleanup or data creation or like calculated properties, right? So things like that often, bite you in the ass for how long it actually takes, right? Which is why I always say, ask why first. Do you really need that? What question are you trying to answer, right? But I digress. So we got a place for that, right? And what you'll also find is it starts to create a common language foundation. I'm never going to stop hitting on that, folks. It's missing in almost every org. When we talk about this stuff, it creates a common language foundation in your system for how this stuff is supposed to work. It also creates common language with the customer when they are not having to rely on calls and emails from people that are naming these stages differently. They're referring to different labels, because there's no standardized way of talking about it, right? And these are the kinds of things that when you remove this stuff, when you remove these points of friction, 1 minute's here, 5 minutes over here, that stuff adds up, not only from a time savings perspective, but just from a stress perspective. Like, how many of you out there know that you're doing something really repetitive that should be systematized, should be automated, and you I'll be honest, you like hate your life in that moment. Every time you have to do that thing, you are not happy with your life choices in that moment, right? But you do it day in, day out because you don't have time to think about it. You don't have the support you need. You don't have the tools you need. When in reality, if you have any piece of HubSpot right now, I mean, custom objects are enterprise only, which is why I'd love to see this native at some point. But there's a bunch of HubSpot that most people aren't realizing. Uh, and, all these little tweaks to the system may not seem like a lot, but they add up over time. And so if we have analytics reporting, then we go to assets, right? In making changes here, I'm not going to go into the CMS today, but making changes here, right? It's very easy to make updates to the process, to the infrastructure, and have that display here very quickly, right? Like being able to add a property like reorder links to the deliverable record and then automatically show it. And then now they have the ability to reorder something. Like this is the kind of stuff that is available to a lot of people right now. And it would just take your customer experience through the roof. You would sell more. You would sell more faster because we're not having to do all this stuff via email and via calls. Now, that big list, right? To put in perspective, just imagine. And I have these are ideas and kind of templates as to what could be a deliverable, right? But what if we could manage all these different types with one object? Now we're finding use cases where like assets, when it's like heavy inventory management and and just the use case is so focused, that's when we create another object and we start associating it, with deliverable, so that the deliverable can still drive, a lot of the customer communication. But, I think this is possible in most cases, right? You don't need multiple objects because in reality, you're not going to create multiple objects. You're just not going to have a place to put the data, right? Because multiple objects creates more complexity, usually. That's why people avoid it. But I think the pipelines, custom object pipelines are hugely underutilized right now, right? And we've just been talking, after the sale, right? When we talk about, my resources related to products, I've wish listed, right? So if we come back here, and at this point, I'm engaging, like yesterday, we started with a lead, from an event. They said they were interested in this product, and I talked about, creating a pre-sales product of interest object, right? I'll use that phrase because Aptitude 8 just did a great video on this concept and use case, right? If we do that, now we're tracking the customer experience much more effectively. We're aligning a lot earlier. All the handoffs later get easier because we have a place to start managing all these changes during the negotiations of the sales process. We're also leveraging any signal from the customers, from the buyers. When they say, hey, I'm interested in this thing, the faster you are to react at the appropriate level. Like we're not sending quotes to people just because they wish listed an object here, right? But we might send them a video about how, hey, here's how other users are using this thing. that you might be interested to understand that, right? Then maybe that takes them to become a hand raiser and fill out the next form, right? So we leave a lot to be desired through the process because we've never had a place for it, or we've never wanted to invest in stuff like product lifecycle management platforms, product information management platforms, all of the management platforms, right? You don't need to go into that level of detail inside of HubSpot to be able to serve your customer. You might have systems like that that are already managing stuff like this, that if we bring it right next to our contacts and our deals and our quotes and our orders, now we can better report on all of those things, right? Without having to export everything, without having to use so many third-party systems to understand our data. Just so many things get easier when we create a place like the deliverable object, right? And before I sign off, like something I've been dreaming about for a long time relates to my history, my career in the X-ray analysis space, related to what happens in those pre-sales moments, right? And I've got this up as an example. Got geological reference materials here, right? And this applies to these materials, applies to the instruments, the equipment that runs the materials, right? If I click on this, right, and you see these values here, that's not how the request usually comes in. Like none of these things are used. It's like, hey, I need something with iron in it and with some aluminum, and it can't go above this level, right? And if we're starting to capture that like earlier in the process, and then we have a place to manage that data, we can understand better which products we're signaling right, to the market. This is all stuff that, one of the most common objections when you talk about recreating a sales process online is like, oh, I need to walk the customer through, customization for their needs. And this is not even replacing that. This is letting you not start from zero and giving the customer some ownership in the process when they favorite stuff and they can move through a wizard to say, I need this element and this element and this element, right? They're engaged now. You're seeing all this information. And the more they can have a part in that process, it's easier to create this team atmosphere, like we're working together to solve your problem. And that is the definition and the difference between a salesperson being asked to convince the buyer and a salesperson being asked to help the buyer buy. If you can change that dynamic, sales gets way easier, the customer experience gets way better, and I guarantee you're going to sell more, you're going to sell more faster, right? So if I favorite this and it gets created, as a deliverable, right? But that deliverable is a pre-sales deliverable, let's say. Now, this historical view of this object, it's not to say that's the one they're going to buy, right? But we can see, oh, they actually needed this element, right? They actually needed this standard. And when that happens 10 times, over the course of a couple months, and you can report on that, like how many times did this specific product need to change, right? Maybe we need to be saying something different. We're not saying the right thing. People are getting confused. This product is not what we think it is. It might be named, wrong, or, something is off. And if we can address that, we remove some of the confusion, some of the friction that we create in the process, right? All of the reporting that leadership teams ask for so often, like by product and by market, and all this stuff becomes much easier and much more relevant and much more actionable, honestly, right? One, because you actually do it. Two, because you don't have to reprocess it every time you need to understand the number, right? So obviously, I could go on all day about this, and you'll hear me go on to some extent. But this is the power, and this is why in the Commerce Hub, data model, I have deliverables showing up, all throughout. And the value of having this object and being able to associate it with different things at different times, like maybe we've got to invoice this, in various times, at various points in time, that are reactive in nature, right? Because they've decided they want to do this service, right? And we start adding on, we've got to do multiple shipments. It's just take a step back. And if you can imagine a new object that can be associated with whatever you need it to, can be labeled however you want, can create some project management understanding, some status understanding in whichever way you need, connected to the manufacturing, pipeline, the buy resell pipeline, the the warehouse pipeline, all these different pipelines that exist in your ERP and accounting systems, inventory management systems. You make a place for that here. Now your customer teams will love you forever, which means they will love all over the customers. You'll create these self-service experiences that are unmatched in your space. There's opportunity here for almost every business I come into contact with. And that's why I thank Casey for coming by today. And when she said, earlier I posted this, like, am I reading her mind? Right? When I say, do you hate the fact that, reporting for line items suck and you can't do this, you can't manage it after? That's from talking to a bunch of people inside and outside of the ecosystem, understanding, I was the spreadsheet guy, 10 years ago. I was the spreadsheet guy managing all of these values, creating these things based on quote requests. Can you do it? Okay, how much is it going to be? Every time I had to pull up a spreadsheet, and I was so good at it, right? As soon as I stepped out of that role, I was like, oh my gosh, this spreadsheet kingdom is not going to get it done if we're going to grow, right? And so that's where I'm coming from with this. Would love any feedback. Specifically, why should this not be a native object? Like if you can conceive of on closed one or when an order gets created, there is always something to be delivered, something that could be called a deliverable that needs to be managed. Why wouldn't you want access to that object? So think about that. Have a wonderful weekend. Let's find this opportunity. Find the opportunity here. There is definite opportunity, especially when we talk about customer success workspace. Come on, people. Let's grow. Let's grow.